Today we are out here taking a look at the all-new 2016 Mazda CX-3. Now, contrary to the 3 being in the name, this is not the crossover version of the Mazda 3. This is in many ways the crossover version of the Mazda 2, and it also explains why we are not getting the Mazda 2 in the United States. Mazda quite logically felt that Americans would be far more interested in a small crossover vehicle than a small sedan or small hatchback. And that's why the only Mazda 2 we see in the United States is actually the Scion IA, which is a rebadged Mazda 2 in sedan form. Now, the CX-3 does not compete with the likes of the RAV4 or the CR-V. This is actually the next size category down. So this competes with things like the Honda HR-V instead of the CR-V. It also competes with things like the Jeep Renegade instead of the Jeep Cherokee and the Chevy Trax. We'll of course dive more into this in the comparison section later, but I actually think that the most appropriate comparison to this vehicle is actually the Buick Encore. The first thing you'll notice about the CX-3 up front is this attractive and very distinctive front end. I actually think that Mazda's latest design language, they're calling this the Kodo design language, is very attractive on basically every vehicle that Mazda has jammed it on so far. I was a little bit worried that shrinking the vehicle this much would cause it to look a little bit odd, but it actually doesn't. I think this is easily the most attractive vehicle in this compact crossover segment, and that would be including those near luxury entries like the Buick Encore. Also very interesting up front, we have full LED headlamps in our top end model here. And not only are these full LEDs, but they also steer in the corners. And most LEDs out there don't steer. Also unusual for this segment is that right behind this Mazda logo, there's actually a radar cruise control sensor because this does have radar adaptive cruise control. Now, it's not full speed range. It gives up right around 15 miles an hour or so. We also have LED fog lights in our model. Logically, the CX-3 is smaller than the CX-5. This is about 10 inches shorter than a CX-5 and about a foot shorter than a Mazda 3 sedan. As you can see on that chart below you, this is a very compact crossover for the United States. There aren't that many vehicles that are actually smaller than this sold in our country, although you can find hatchbacks smaller than this. Now, obviously, manufacturers can't shrink the front of the vehicle too much because we still have to fit an engine under there, so all of the size difference really comes out of the passenger compartment and the cargo area. You will notice this has less cargo space and less rear passenger room than a Mazda CX-5. Like other Mazda models in the US, we have these sort of Angry Birds themed headlamps. They tilt inwards there, and they are quite distinctive. They remind me an awful lot of the Infiniti Q50. You'll notice that down here we have twin exhaust tips even on our front-wheel drive model with the 2-liter engine. Now, the one big difference you'll notice between this and larger crossovers is the hatch, because the hatch doesn't start down here. It actually starts above the license plate right there. That means that we get a little bit less room in the hatch than you might think. Unlike the Mazda 3, there is only one engine under this hood. It is a 2-liter 4-cylinder engine. It produces 146 horsepower and 146 pound-feet of torque. Now, that's relatively torquey for a naturally aspirated entry in this segment, and it's all down to Mazda's SkyActiv technology system. You can see the biggest impact of SkyActiv right here behind the engine, because the engine actually ends right around here, the firewall is right around there in the vehicle, and the exhaust system is back there. Mazda uses a very innovative exhaust manifold to improve efficiency and improve torque in their engines. As you can see by the chart on the side of your screen, fuel economy is absolutely excellent in the CX-3, as you would expect, and this vehicle has no problems averaging over 30 miles per gallon on my daily commute. Perhaps the most interesting thing about SkyActiv, however, is how it affects the exterior proportions of the vehicle. You'll notice that the distance between that wheel and the door is actually larger than you'll see in many compact crossovers, giving this a more rear-wheel drive appearance, a slightly longer hood look. And that's all down to the positioning of that exhaust manifold. Keeping in mind that the scores are only applicable within a particular segment, I'm going to give these seats 8 out of 10 points. I did find the seats in the Buick Encore to be more comfortable than these, just largely because these seats don't have any adjustable lumbar support and there's no power movement mechanism at all. They're completely manual, so manual recline, manual height adjustment, etc. Now, we do have a tilt telescopic steering column with a large range of motion that does help you get a better seating position. Now, you should know that the passenger seat does not adjust for height. Keeping in mind that this is quite a small crossover, obviously the rear seats are going to be fairly compact. Even though the front seats are relatively thin, which helps us get a little bit more rear legroom, my knees are actually touching the seat back when this front seat is comfortably adjusted for me. Now, I do have an adequate amount of headroom. I actually have about 1.5 inches left of headroom there, and otherwise the seat is relatively comfortable. Now, the back is also fairly narrow because, again, this is a Mazda 2 crossover. That means that sitting right here in the middle, it would be difficult to fit 2 adults next to you. Now sitting in the middle seat, my head is just barely touching the ceiling, but I could probably do this if I needed to for a while. Moving all the way over to the right side of the vehicle, this front seat is all the way back in its tracks, and I can't actually put my knees behind the seat because there just isn't enough room. In terms of overall rear end practicality, I like the fact that the middle seat is actually part of the seat back itself. It doesn't come out of the ceiling. That makes it a lot easier to put things in the back without having to worry where that seat belt is going. Now you notice the side seat belt actually does come out of the side of the vehicle. However, I can actually unlatch it from the seat back, and then it will drape there relatively nicely. Now with the seat folded flat like this, it is almost flat with the cargo area in the rear, although the cargo area does have a lower compartment. The CX-3 obviously loses some cargo space versus a CX-5, but it's also a little bit lower than you'll find in the Mazda 3 hatch. Now under this load floor right here, you'll actually notice we have a secondary load floor where we can put some additional cargo. It's about 3 inches deep or so. And then underneath that, you will find an actual real live spare tire as well as a subwoofer in our up-end model. Obviously, cargo room in the back is going to be the big difference between this and something like a CX-5 or even a Mazda 3 hatch, because we just don't have quite that much room in the back. You can fit a 26-inch and a 24-inch roller bag back here, but it's a pretty tight squeeze. Now, if we lift up the load floor, you will find some additional storage space right below that. We have another little lid right here, and opening that lid reveals the spare tire and the optional subwoofer in our Bose sound system equipped model. The CX-3 scores 8 out of 10 points in my exclusive Trunk Comfort Index. You will find more room in something like a Jeep Patriot, which is actually hanging on for another model year, we're told, because it is so square. It also is a little bit longer than this, and that helps out in the back. A very nice touch that is often missing in this particular segment is that we have a very nice helper handle right here on the hatchback to help you close the hatch. As we go around the cabin of the CX-3, it is important to keep in mind that this is a competitor to the HR-V, not the CR-V or the RAV4. And as such, you will find plastics qualities a little bit lower in this cabin than you will in that next size category up. Even so, the CX-3 has perhaps the nicest cabin in this category, especially in the upper end trims like we're in. We have height adjustable seat belts for both the driver and the front passenger, and two-way adjustable headrests up front. Because we are in the top end model, we have this very attractive light colored leather that is perforated for better ventilation in the middle. Notice it's not ventilated in this model. Our model also has these faux suede inserts on the middle of the seat and on the door panels as well. The door panels are composed out of mostly hard touch plastics. We have hard plastics here, sort of a faux metallic trim right here, and hard plastics all below that on the door. We do have that faux suede insert in the middle, and this red portion of that armrest is also a soft touch plastic. Like many compact vehicles, you'll notice if I move this camera backwards right here, that where a taller person's elbow would go is not actually on that armrest. So you would have to sit a decent amount forward if you wanted to actually use the armrest on the door. The dashboard is styled very similarly to other Mazda models. We have these round air vents here. There's an open and close knob right there in the center, and you can direct them in any direction. We also have a smaller square air vent right here for the passenger. This section of the dashboard is actually a real stitched pleather section, so there are actually two pieces of imitation leather right here, and then they are stitched together with that seam you see there. We do have a standard 7-inch multifunction touchscreen infotainment display. This is a little bit different than other Mazda models where this display is optional. Now the upper portion of the dashboard is all hard plastic. Although this screen is standard, the navigation software is not. Now Mazda does allow you to add that afterwards for a certain price at the dealer, and certain models of course do have navigation available. On the passenger side, we do find a very accommodating glove compartment. It's sort of this fold-down bin arrangement, easily able to accommodate a large tablet computer. Back over in the center of the dash, you'll find the controls for the optional heated seats, the single zone climate control, and at the very bottom of your screen, we have a single slot optical disc player. If you want to know more about the Mazda Connect infotainment system, go ahead and click that banner at the bottom of your screen. You'll be taken on over to our dedicated infotainment review. Below that optical disc player, you will find the slot for the SD card. That's for the navigation database right there. We have two USB inputs, a single auxiliary input, and a 12-volt power outlet. We also have a very traditional console shifter. Drive is all the way down, manual is over to the left, up for down, and down for up, which is the reverse of many systems out there. Behind the shifter, we have the sport mode selection button. This affects the way the transmission shifts as well as the way the engine behaves. And then behind that, we have the controls for that Mazda Connect infotainment system. We have dedicated access buttons for media, the home button, navigation right over there. We have a back button with a favorites button on that other side, and then this is the mute and volume knob. Mazda continues to use a very traditional handbrake, and then we have a soft padded center armrest. It doesn't actually have a storage cubby, so if we lift it up, we do find the two cup holders right there underneath it. That's because this is not a terribly large vehicle, and so the console is also a little bit smaller as a result. We do have a small storage slot right here at the end of this armrest where you could sort of insert a cell phone if you wanted to. Now there is a metal spring inside, so if you don't have a case on your phone, it may end up scratching that phone case. Keep that in mind. On the driver's side, we have a very basic instrument cluster, which is very similar to what we see in the Mazda 3. We have a large central tachometer right here, and then we have this small digital speedometer on the right of that. The fuel gauge is a digital display on the right here, along with the trip computer that is controlled via a button on the steering wheel. And then above that, we have the readout for our cruise control and the temperature display. The left side of the display is our transmission mode indicator, so drive, manual mode, etc. right there, and then we have our odometer below that. To make up for the lack of information that we get down here in the instrument cluster, we do have this small heads-up style display. It actually is this piece of plastic right here that pops up out of the dashboard when you turn the car on and then folds back into the dashboard when you turn the car off. Mazda uses this style of display because the heads-up displays that integrate into the windshield of the vehicle actually require a special windshield treatment, and that does get a little bit more expensive. This display gives you the status of your cruise control as well as your radar cruise control system. So right now we have our radar cruise control active on the vehicle. You can actually see the following distance ticks off right there. On that side, it would have the speed if we had a speed set on the system. We also get that digital speed readout and the status of our lane departure warning system. Our CX-3 has this comfortable leather-wrapped steering wheel. It is an almost three-spoke design with a sort of split spoke at the bottom. We have paddle shifters on the back, down on the left, and up on the right. We have our cruise control buttons on this side, and because we do have the radar cruise control system, we do have this distance set button right over here. This sets the speed on-off down there. On the left side of the steering wheel, we find dedicated phone hang-up and pickup buttons for the Bluetooth system, voice command button. This info button toggles through the trip computer that's displayed on that multifunction display right there, volume up, down, track forward, and backward. Many of you have asked about the logic behind this small heads-up display in current Mazda models. Now, I admit that like many of you on Facebook, I do find it a little bit cheesy, but the logic behind it is actually quite sound. You'll notice in this frame that we're mostly focused on this instrument cluster right here. And of course, this camera focuses a little bit differently than the human eye does. So focusing on this display versus focusing on that tree over there, that's actually a bit more for the eye to focus and adjust between than focusing, for instance, on the image displayed on this piece of plastic and that tree over there. Because the focal area of this display is actually beyond the dashboards. That means your eyes don't have quite as far to adjust the one to the other. The display is also logically higher off the dashboard than these instruments down here in the binnacle itself. That means your eyes don't have to leave the road quite as far in order to check your speed. In terms of acceleration, the CX-3 gets an A hands down. 0 to 60 happens in 8.3 seconds. Now you may be wondering why I'm giving 8.3 seconds an A. That's because this is significantly faster than the other entries in this segment. The HR-V does that in 9.7, and something like the Chevy Trax or Buick Encore, they take about 10 seconds to do that. Even the Jeep Renegade with its 9-speed automatic transmission still takes 9.3 seconds. That means this is actually quite different than the Mazda CX-5, which is actually one of the slower vehicles in its class. Although it does have class-leading handling numbers, it doesn't really perform all that well when it comes to acceleration. In terms of braking, things slip down just a little bit to a B+. We ran from 60 to 0 in 127 feet. I think that largely has to do with the tires in this vehicle. The HR-V and the Encore got slightly shorter 60 to 0 scores, so I do suspect that if you put different tires in this aftermarket that you would get a slightly better score. When it comes to handling, like many of the other Mazda models, I'm going to give this an A+. This has an excellent handling feel for the mass market segment. Now again, keep in mind that these scores are all within the same category, so obviously this is not going to handle like a rear-wheel drive BMW, but you will be surprised how much steering feel you get out of a front-wheel drive car. Mazda has some absolutely excellent suspension designs up front, and it really shows in this model. Not only are the absolute handling numbers better than most of the other entries in this segment, but the handling feel is absolutely positively the best in this segment. Even though we have electric power steering, we are still getting some feeling through this steering wheel. And when it comes to the ride, I am going to give this a B. It is a little bit firm in my opinion. If you want a smooth ride, then you will have to go for something like the Buick or the Jeep Renegade. Of course, you are going to give up a decent amount in terms of handling. Driving the CX-3 on gravel roads or dirt roads like we're on right now is where you really will begin to see that the CX-3 is fairly firm for this segment. Now, I am still surprised that the CX-3 does not come across as overly harsh, however, given the high score we get in handling. Mazda has done an excellent job tuning the suspension to sit right on the fence. You should know that even though all-wheel drive is available in the CX-3, this does not have the same kind of off-road mission in mind as we find in the Jeep Renegade. The Jeep Renegade has more ground clearance than this. It has a much more advanced all-wheel drive system as well. Now, this car is much more suited to on-road driving, and the Renegade in some ways is actually more suited to off-road driving, or being a little bit more balanced on that side of the equation. This is tuned a little bit more to the on-road side. Now when it comes to snow or even winter travel on this gravel road, there really isn't going to be that much of a difference between the two systems. In terms of cabin noise, we came in at 71 decibels as long as you're not pushing the engine too hard. There is a decent amount of engine noise in this particular cabin. You will notice that certain entries like the Jeep Renegade are quieter. Now one area where the CX-3 also excels above the competition is in fuel economy, which has been incredibly good. Even though I have been driving this vehicle fairly hard out on my favorite winding mountain roads, and I have been doing plenty of stop and go traffic, we have been 0 to 60 testing, etc., I've still averaged just over 30 miles per gallon. The important thing to know about this vehicle is that we're getting 30 miles per gallon with an ordinary 6-speed automatic transmission. This car is not using any of those modern tricks like CVTs or dual clutch transmissions in order to give us this high fuel economy score. Instead, Mazda gets us to that high fuel efficiency with a very efficient engine and a very efficient traditional 6-speed automatic. We have been driving the all-wheel drive version of the CX-3. If you opt for the optional all-wheel drive system, you will notice a few mile per gallon drop in your fuel economy score. Even so, however, this is definitely at the top of the pack. The last time I had the Buick Encore, I scored nearly this fuel economy. It was right around 29.5 miles per gallon average or so. The big difference, of course, is that Buick Encore is one of the slowest vehicles to 60. It takes nearly 2 full seconds longer to get that vehicle up to highway speeds than it does this Mazda. Yet the fuel economy is actually quite similar, this vehicle to that vehicle. Very much like Mazda's CX-5, there are other vehicles out there that compete with the CX-3 that do very well in certain areas and do better than the CX-3 in certain areas. There are more practical vehicles, there are more comfortable vehicles out there, but none of the vehicles out there in this particular segment will be nearly this much fun to drive out on the road. As I said before, Jeep's Renegade is more tuned towards off-road use. The Buick Encore is a little bit more luxurious in this. It's a little bit softer, but does not handle as well. It's not nearly as much fun. I think the Chevy Trax comes off as a little bit rough around the edges, even though it is related to that Buick Encore. Honda's HR-V is a nice middle-of-the-road option, and it is an awful lot of fun with the 6-speed manual transmission, but it's not nearly as much fun overall as this vehicle. I do like a manual transmission. I like the ability to command the vehicle to do whatever I want, whenever I want it. However, I have to say that I would take this 6-speed automatic over the 6-speed manual in the HR-V. The primary reason is that the acceleration that we get in this vehicle and the handling that we get in this vehicle come along with the automatic transmission, and I think that's enough of a trade-off to give up the control that you do get in the HR-V. Pricing is fairly simple with the CX-3. It starts at $19,960 and includes 17-inch alloy wheels, the 7-inch infotainment display we've been seeing. You don't get navigation, however, but you do get a backup camera for that low base price. The important thing to know when comparing this with the competition is the base model uses an automatic transmission, and all-wheel drive is a $1,700 option across the line. $21,960 buys you the midline trim level in front-wheel drive form. You get keyless go, you get leatherette seats, and you get blind spot monitoring with cross-traffic detection as well. The Grand Touring model that we have been testing here is $24,990 starting and just about $28,000 fully loaded like we're testing here. The Grand Touring model is very well equipped at that price. We get the same engine and transmission. All-wheel drive is still optional, but we get leather interior. We also get the heads-up display. We get the LED headlamps and LED fog lamps, 18-inch wheels, satellite radio, navigation, as well as satellite radio. When it comes to the competition, you may notice that this actually stops right around where the Encore starts. And actually, this is much better equipped than the Buick Encore at this time. Even though adding all the options we're seeing on this particular model to a Buick Encore would cost you about $4,000 to $5,000 more, the Encore in that form would actually still have less equipment than we find in this particular Mazda, making this an incredible value in this segment, especially if you're looking at something towards the high end of this segment. The major downside, of course, to the Buick Encore also applies to the Chevy Trax, and that would be we get a distinct lack of power, and it's much slower to 60 than the CX-3 we're testing here. Now, the Chevy Trax starts just over $20,000, but we get less standard equipment in that model than we get in the CX-3. The interior is also definitely a step behind the CX-3. We have a lot of hard plastics. The fit and finish is not nearly as good inside that Chevy Trax. And overall, I find the Chevy Trax to be a bad value compared to the Buick Encore. If you like the Chevy Trax, you should just go buy the Buick Encore instead. It actually doesn't cost that much more money, but you get a lot more standard equipment in the Buick and a much nicer interior than the Chevy. Same sort of thing goes here. You get a lot more standard equipment and a much nicer interior than you get in that Chevy Trax. Driving dynamics wise, this is also superior to the Chevy Trax, giving you better ride, better handling, a quieter interior, and of course, faster acceleration. Jeep's Renegade does appear to be a very good value, starting just under $18,000. However, you do need to keep in mind that $18,000 price point is for a manual transmission model with very few options. And so the base version of this actually has more standard equipment, and the value of that standard equipment is more than the $2,000 that separate the two. Adding the automatic transmission to the Jeep Renegade brings the price tag up only to a few $1,000s less than this, and we still get less standard equipment in that model. And interestingly enough, even though the engine displacement is larger, it is also slower to 60 than the CX-3. Now, no version of the Jeep Renegade will handle better than the CX-3 because its mission is different, and that is the important thing to know with the Renegade. The Renegade can actually go off-road, and I have actually taken it on off-road paths that were relatively challenging for the current generation Jeep Cherokee, and the Jeep Renegade handled it without a problem. You could not do that in the CX-3. It just doesn't have that same kind of all-wheel drive system. However, there are trade-offs for that. The trade-off is definitely in the ride and handling department. Although Jeep keeps telling us that the Patriot's days are numbered, it keeps recurring year after year, and it will be available as a 2016 model year vehicle again for just under $17,000. And that makes it the least expensive vehicle in this particular segment. Now, the fuel economy is not terribly good in that model compared to the CX-3. However, it is a lot less expensive, so it will take you a decent amount of time to make up the difference just on fuel savings alone. Although the Patriot is definitely getting long in the tooth, I actually think that the exterior is very attractive to me. It's one of the most attractive vehicles in this segment because of its classic Jeep boxy shape. Now, the Patriot does not handle as well as the CX-3, it does not get as good of a fuel economy as the CX-3, and the interior is not nearly as nice as the CX-3, but it is significantly cheaper. Now, some of you may have been wondering why I was talking about the Buick Encore, because in theory, the Buick is supposed to be a near luxury brand, competing with vehicles that are above the Mazda in terms of general lineup. However, the Encore is relatively inexpensive, starting around $24,000, and this vehicle right here goes up to about $28,000. The last time I drove the Buick Encore, I have to say I really liked it. However, this CX-3 is just a better vehicle overall, to be honest. We get more luxury features on this than we find in the Buick Encore. Things like these turning LED headlamps, the radar adaptive cruise control system, etc. Now, that said, there are certain areas where the Encore does excel over this. You can tell it is a near luxury vehicle because we have more soft touch plastics on the inside. The dashboard is not a hard touch plastic, and I think the gauge cluster is also more luxurious and more attractive than we find in the CX-3. However, the CX-3 still gives you more features in general than that Encore. When you factor in the standard feature content, a Grand Touring version of the CX-3 starting at around $24,000 will have about $2,000 more standard equipment than you get in a base Buick Encore. So the question you have to answer is, how much are the squishy dashboard bits and power adjustable seats worth to you? Now, I did find the Buick Encore seats to be a tiny bit more comfortable than these, and the interior overall has a slightly more premium feel, but I have to say that if my money was on the line, I would take the Mazda CX-3 instead. The autonomous braking system, the radar adaptive cruise control, the LED headlamps that are absolutely excellent out on the road, and the handling dynamics of the CX-3 are better, in my opinion, and worth more than what we find in the Buick Encore. Fuel economy is actually relatively similar. The Buick Encore gets incredible mileage in this segment, but performance is not as good. 0 to 60 times in handling scores, just not as good as the CX-3. A lot of you wondered how this compares to the CX-5. Now, there's no manual transmission in this, although we do get a manual transmission starting in the CX-5. So if you want a manual, you will have to go to the bigger vehicle. Bigger is definitely the difference between the two. We get an awful lot more cargo room and rear seat room in the CX-5. Driving dynamics-wise, I do think this is superior to the CX-5, but the difference is not as large as you might think. The CX-5 is very, very nimble out on the road. In terms of price, the extra size in the CX-5 will cost you about $4,000, because even though the price difference between the two is only about $3,400 or so, we get more standard feature content in this than we get in the larger vehicle. Now, here comes the real twist, because if you're looking for better handling than a CX-5, but you want that same kind of vehicle, same level of feature functionality, etc., I would actually suggest skipping both the CX-5 and the CX-3 and just getting a Mazda 3 hatch, because the Mazda 3 hatch handles better than this. It's priced about the same, but you actually get more power in that vehicle. You can also get a manual transmission if you want to. We find more cargo space in the back, more passenger room on the back seats, more passenger room up front as well. We also find an interior that is very similarly styled to this, but I think is actually a nicer interior overall. Now obviously the big difference is going to be all-wheel drive. The model we've been testing here does not have it, but you can get it in the CX-3 and the CX-5, and you cannot get it in the Mazda 3 hatch. However, because there is a pricing premium basically on crossovers like this, you can actually get a Mazda 3 hatch with more power and about the same kind of feature levels for about the same price. Thanks for taking the time to check out this video. Again, I'm Alex Dykes, and this has been the 2016 Mazda CX-3. Go ahead and click that subscribe button at the bottom of your screen, and I'll see you next week.